Hi, I'm Merlin, and together with Matthias, we will give you an update on the latest development of the UI5 tooling. We first presented the UI5 tooling to you on UI5Con 2018, and a lot of things happened since then. So let's get started. First, by introducing ourselves. Matthias?
Hi, I'm Matthias and working as a developer in the UI5 Core Foundation team.
And I'm Merlin. I'm a development architect also in the UI5 Core Foundation team. First of all, let's have a short recap on how the tooling of UI5 evolved over time. So back when the UI5 project was started, the first tooling that was developed was a Maven-based tooling, so mostly consisting of existing Maven plugins, but also with a lot of custom developed Java code. For example, for bundling the UI5 framework, for compiling themes, stuff like that. It was an SAP internal project and never made available to customers or any other external parties. So it was really just only used for UI5 framework development itself and some application development inside SAP. So with the open sourcing of OpenUI5, we had to fill this gap outside of SAP, and we did that by providing a grunt tooling. So this was already basically a Node script, but specifically crafted for use in the grunt task runner. It was mainly focused on application development, so it had features like a component preload generation, which already helped speeding up loading times of applications. And together with less OpenUI5, you were also able to compile custom themes. But it was very limited for feature-wise. For example, it was not usable for library development at all. So in 2017, we decided to start working on a new project, which was a completely Node.js based tooling for UI5, which should not only replace the existing grunt tooling, but also replace our custom Maven code that, like over the years, also had some problems. Yeah, you will see in a second. So our Node.js based tooling should have the same features as the Maven tooling. It should be open source like the grunt tooling. And yeah, we are kind of getting there. So our motivation was first to have a future tooling for building the UI5 framework itself. So a tooling for us as a UI5 framework developers, but also a tooling that covers all the basic use cases of application and library development out there. So a typical UI5 project should be able to just use the UI5 tooling and be good to go. But it should also be a foundation for more advanced UI5 projects, which you can see some examples later on. I won't go into too much details on how to get started with the UI5 tooling. I think there are already plenty of resources out there covering this. It basically didn't change much since 2018. You can install the UI5 CLI from npm and set up your project and you're good to go. Just head over to our documentation. It should all be there. So next we'll have a look at where we are today and how we got there. So back in 2018, we published the UI5 tooling as a beta for the first time, open source on GitHub and to npm. At the same time, we also published all OpenUI5 libraries to the npm registry. So with this, you were already able to use the UI5 tooling for OpenUI5 application development or also library development. Yeah, it was almost a replacement for grunt already. Later that year, we also added custom task extensibility, which enabled, for example, if your project needs some custom build step like transpilation, you were able to add this to the build process of the UI5 tooling using custom task extensibility. So this also enabled a lot of use cases for projects out there. Early in 2019, we published version 1.0 of the UI5 tooling. There were not a lot of breaking changes. It was mostly just a signal that the UI5 tooling is now production ready. Like we tested it for a longer time. We added a lot of additional test cases in our code. So yeah, it was ready for productive use. Later that year, we then saw the first integration into SAP Web IDE for library development. So before that, it was not possible to build libraries inside SAP Web IDE, at least not easily. And with the UI5 tooling, they were able to provide templates for this using the UI5 tooling as a build tooling for the library. Also later that year, we added custom middleware extensibility, which allowed you to add custom server middleware to the development server that is part of the UI5 tooling. So together with the custom task extensibility, you were really able to add a lot of customization to the UI5 tooling. And now today we see that a kind of ecosystem starts to evolve out of this. So for example, if you need transpilation, there are already a couple of custom tasks out there, open source on GitHub and also published to the NPM registry, which you can just install and use in your own project. And also for middlewares, there are a lot of custom middlewares focusing on different parts of development out there. Early this year, we switched the framework, so the SAP internal UI5 framework build, the theme build actually, to the UI5 tooling. So we were able to get rid of a lot of legacy code there for the build and really switch to the same build that you can use for your own libraries out there. So this makes things easier for us, and also for you. You have like the greatest theme build tool for UI5 available at your fingertips. Also, earlier this year, we saw the first integration into the new SAP Business Application Studio, which is the successor of the Web IDE. So there, it's basically all UI5 development is using the UI5 tooling now. Back in April, we published UI5 tooling version 2.0, which had the focus on the SAP UI5 availability on NPM. So also in April, we published all SAP UI5 libraries to the public NPM registry. And this was something requested by a lot of UI5 developers, both inside SAP as well as outside SAP. And with the UI5 tooling 2.0, you can now really easily start working on SAP UI5 based applications or libraries with the UI5 tooling. And you will see a demo of this in a minute. And for the future, we plan many things. Just to highlight two here, we'll have some more later in the presentation. For our internal use, we want to switch the complete UI5 framework build to the UI5 tooling. So we basically want to replace most of the Maven plugins and especially most of the custom Java code that we use today to build the UI5 framework with the UI5 tooling. The main benefit from this, which we expect, is that we, for example, can switch to ES6 code or switch to use of ES6 in our code base. And also, we want to have more extensibility. So we want to enable more use cases for the UI5 tooling using more extensibility, hopefully. So let's have a look into a bit more detail on the UI5 tooling 2.0. I compiled a list of what I think are most important changes here, and a couple of them are actually directly related to the publishing of the SAP UI5 libraries to NPM. So because of this, we added package manager or package manager-like capabilities to the UI5 tooling. So in the UI5 CLI, for example, you now have new commands, UI5 use and add, which you will see in a demo in a second, and also a framework version parameter, which allows you to quickly change the version of UI5 you want to use for your build or your serve task that you're executing. On the lower level APIs, so the modules that make up the tooling as a whole, we have for the UI5 project a new translator called UI5 Framework. So for those of you who just use the UI5 CLI, you never see this really. But for those that make use of our Node.js APIs, which we'll also come to later in this presentation, this is a really interesting feature because with this translator, you can now on a Node.js level also ask the UI5 tooling to make a certain set of SAP UI5 dependencies available to your project. So you just state the libraries that you need and the version, just a single version of UI5 that you want. And the UI5 Framework Translator takes care of downloading all the necessary dependencies in the correct version and just putting them on your file system, giving you the paths back. And this is also what the UI5 CLI uses for normal development. We also added a couple of more features. So there's a configuration schema now for UI5 configuration, mainly for the UI5 YAML, which was also requested a lot. You'll see this in my demo in a second. We also added a new specification version 2.0, which comes with a couple of changes to default configuration, but also enables the use of a couple of new features. In the UI5 server, we now expect .property files to be UTF-8 encoded by default. This was a learning for us because SAP internally, we were used to have .property files encoded the Java way, so being Latin 1. But we learned that outside of SAP, most projects just use UTF-8 for all the resources of their UI5 project. This is partially also due to Web IDE not differentiating here and also just using UTF-8 for .property files. So projects defining specification version 2.0 or higher, by default, we expect those projects to have .property files UTF-8 encoded. If this is not the case for your project, you can, of course, change this in the configuration of your project in the UI5 YAML. It's all in our documentation. Also in the UI5 server, we added a new middleware for test runners, or test runner middleware. This was also something, so a lot of projects, especially those using, for example, the Web IDE templates, typically rely on test runner resources that are part of the SAP UI core library. But these resources were not part of the NPM resources of the SAP UI core library. So they were just not available when working with the NPM resources. So with this middleware, you can now use, or you now have these resources available to your project, and you can now execute your test suite, for example, with the NPM resources. And last but not least, we added a new type called theme library, which should make it easier to work with theme libraries compared to before, where theme libraries had to be modeled as normal libraries, which made some things more complicated. So to quickly demonstrate these new package management capabilities of the UI5 tooling, I chose to use the OpenUI5 sample app here. It's a very basic application, and some of you might already know it since we used it in a couple of presentations already. In this UI5 YAML here, you can already see that this project makes use of some new configuration that comes with the UI5 tooling version 2.0. First of all, it already defines specification version 2.0, and this is a requirement to be able to use this framework configuration down here. In this framework configuration, the project can now define which framework it wants to use, so either OpenUI5 or SAP UI5, and which version of the framework it wants to use. It also lists all the libraries of the framework it depends on. And with this information, the UI5 tooling is then able to download all the required dependencies from NPM and make them available to the project. So if you want to make changes to this configuration here, or if you want to define the initial configuration for a project, you can, instead of modifying the YAML file directly, also use the new CLI commands that I mentioned earlier. So for example, to define which framework and version you want to use in a project, you can use the new UI5 use command. So in this case, I will just change the version that is currently being used. So for example, here I can define OpenUI5 in version 178. And if I execute this, the UI5 tooling will automatically identify the latest patch level of the 178 release of OpenUI5 and define this as the version to be used for this project. I can also add additional libraries that my project depends on to my configuration using the UI5 add command. So for example, if I want to add a dependency to the SAP UI table library, I can write this command, execute it, and a framework dependency to the SAP UI library, table library has been added to my UI5 YAML here. So if I then start developing, for example, I start the UI5 server and maybe directly open an HTML page, you can see that now the tooling is fetching all the missing dependencies from NPM and installing them locally. So now my app starts and it's using these local dependencies. Another thing I want to demonstrate is the schema validation. So as I said earlier, we now have a configuration schema available in the tooling. And we actually published this schema to the public JSON schema store project. So here on this page, you can now find the UI5 YAML entry. And if you have the right extension in your IDE, for example, for Visual Studio Code, there's this YAML extension, but there are also other extensions available for other IDEs. This schema will automatically be downloaded for files named UI5.yaml. So what this does now is, for example, if I mistype the framework name here, like I type in pony, it will automatically tell me that this value is not acceptable as a framework name for a UI5 YAML configuration, and that values are only OpenUI5 or SAP UI5. And I even get auto completion for this. So this was also a long requested feature, especially for those cases where you just miss a space or something. Now, thanks to the schema validation, you will get an error right away in your editor, and this should make working with the UI5 tooling easier. So as you can see, a couple of package management capabilities have been added to the UI5 tooling itself. And we considered for a long time whether or not we should go down this path or rather rely on existing package management solutions. And the reasoning for why we chose this path and also some other background information is what I've put into the blog post that is linked below here. So the UI5 Tutors Bus for number 49. Yeah, just check it out for all the details. I still want to highlight some of the benefits that we see from having this solution now. So first of all, as you were able to see in my demo, we now have a seamless integration into the UI5 tooling. You only work with the UI5 CLI to get your dependencies, at least the SAP UI5 dependencies. Other dependencies, like to dependencies of other UI5 projects that you develop, like a reuse library or some third-party library that you're using in a project, are still managed by NPM. But the whole SAP UI5 dependencies or OpenUI5 dependency experience is all managed by the UI5 tooling now. This also means that you only define one UI5 version. You don't need to maintain a couple of versions that are written in the package.json, for example, for all the different libraries that make up UI5. There's only one version, and the UI5 tooling takes care of installing the correct combination of the actual libraries in the correct versions. And also the UI5 tooling stores all of this in a shared local cache. So it's on user level by default, which means it's not per project like NPM, which should make development a bit faster locally. So basically, the UI5 version only needs to be downloaded once on a developer's machine and then can be used across all UI5 projects on this computer. I also want to go into a bit more detail on the specification version, which I mentioned earlier. So now we have published specification version 2.0 and actually in the meantime already 2.1. But what does this mean? Basically, the specification version is a way to tell the tooling which APIs or which configuration level a project expects or wants to use. But ultimately, this is all per project. This is not really related to dependencies of this project. So for example, if I have an application defining specification version 2.0, which then uses an extension like a custom task in specification version 2.1 and a custom middleware which defines specification version 1.0, as long as you're using a UI5 CLI with a version that supports the highest of these three specification versions, you're good to go. So this will just perfectly work, and you can actually mix and match the specification versions however you like. It's only related to the project itself. So for example, the custom task with specification version 2.1 has some new features available, for example, for use. It might get some additional parameters in its signature provided by the UI5 tooling. But also it might, like the other project, the server middleware with specification version 1.0 might have a different default value for some configuration, like a server middleware in specification version 3.0. Yeah, so basically they are all intercompatible. I also have the compatibility metrics here. And as you can see, there's always downward compatibility. UI5 CLI in the latest version 2.2 or higher still supports specification version 0.1. And you can actually have a project with specification version 0.1 using an extension with specification version 2.1. And this will just work. We can't guarantee that this will stay true in the future. Maybe there will be a breaking change, but as of today, we are fully compatible downwards.
Now we come to the first demo. I would like to show some project structure example where we have multiple tooling projects in one monorepository. We are using Yarn workspaces here. So in our root package JSON, we define that all our workspace projects are part of the packages folder. And here you can see those projects. We have one application. We have a library that contains a custom control. We have a server project that defines or provides a middleware and a way to load our data from the backend. And we have a theme library project that has a custom theme. First, let's go into the app project. Here you can see in the package JSON that we have dependencies also to other projects which are part of this repository. And with the Yarn workspace mode, we can easily link them here between each other. So we have dependencies to the theme library, to the library, and also development dependency to the server in order to include the middleware. So let's directly jump into running our app. So I'm going to the terminal and now navigate into our application folder. Here I can just do UI5 serve, and with -O I can start the browser and a certain page, here the index.html. So it takes some time because all resources are loaded as single requests, and also the theme needs to be compiled. And as you can see, this is our custom theme that comes from the theme library. And we have a list of repositories of our tooling repositories on GitHub with some information like stars and downloads, which come from our middleware. And if I navigate into one project, then you can see a chart, which is a custom control that comes from our library. So now back to the editor. And I would like to show the UI5 YAML file of our application. So here you can see that we define or use the OpenUI5 framework and have some dependencies on libraries like the core library M and F. And we use two custom middlewares. One is the live reload middleware, which is a community contribution or community middleware which integrates live reload so that you can easily refresh automatically when developing. And we also have our backend middleware that comes from the server project in order to be able to load the data that is shown in the app. Now into the server project. So the server project can be run in two different ways or used in two different ways. The first one is what we saw right now, that we use the middleware of the server in our app project to mount it as a custom middleware. This is done via the configuration in here with the UI5 YAML file. So we define the name that you also saw in the application YAML file and a path to the middleware. And the second mode here to run the server is to run it standalone. So we create some standalone Express server and just mount the middleware directly, along with a static serving of the dist folder of our app. So I'm going to show this at the end of the demo, how a productive setup here might look like, where we have just the same middleware as we use for development, but we have a static deployment of our app, which is usually what you would like to have. So the UI5 serve is not intended to be used for productive service. So next to our library. The library has one custom control, which is called chart, and it integrates some charting library which comes from NPM. So in our package.json, we have a dependency defined to this chartist library. And in order to use it in our UI5 tooling project, we can add a shim to it. So here on the top, you see the normal configurations like the framework and dependency to the core. And we have another configuration in here which defines a shim. So we can map the files provided by the npm package that we downloaded from npm into our namespace. So we can just require this third-party module from our code. So looking into the chart control, you can see how this is done. So in this third-party chartist folder, we have the files available that come from npm. That is what you saw right now in this path mappings. And yeah, we can just require the chartist module and then use it in our code here. So now coming to the theme library. The theme library is a new type that we added to the UI5 tooling. You can see it defined in the UI5 YAML here. So the theme library type is similar to the library, but with less tasks being executed, as we only have theme resources in here. So for example, the OpenUI5 theme libraries are of this type, and if you create custom themes like here in this case, this is the right type to choose, as it just executes the theme relevant tasks. So here we have dependencies to all the libraries of OpenUI5 in this case that we are going to theme. So those match up with the libraries we need for our application in this case, but we could add more here if we have the need to. And as we don't start from scratch, but build on top of the SAP Fiori 3 theme, we also need to have this as a dependency here. So how does this look like? Actually, it's pretty easy, as UI5 comes with a lot of parameters to allow theming. So the only thing we need to do is to create a folder in the core namespace with the name of our theme. And in here, we need some basic files to override some parameters. So I defined some colors of the UI5 con theme, so to say, as you know it from the website, in order to have some example here of how a custom theme or extending a SAP theme can be done. And most of the project here is then just boilerplate to import the Fiori 3 dark theme and then import these parameters. So this needs to be done for all the libraries we want to theme, but they all just contain these 2 lines. And the same is also done for our custom library, so that this is also themed properly. Okay, so that's it, what I wanted to show about this project. And now to the end, I would like to show how some productive environment might look like. So usually you would develop with the UI5 server, and then at some point you would do a build and then run those build files. So in this case, I prepared building the app and dependencies. So they have been already put into the dist folder of the application. And now if I go to the server and do a yarn start, it will start this Express server I showed earlier, and it will then serve the files from the dist folder of the app. And if I open this in the browser, then you can see that it starts up way faster because just static files are served and we have bundles and the theme is built already. So that's it for the project structure demo. Now I would like to show another demo, which is how you can use the Node.js API of the tooling to have some more advanced control over what is being executed and to have a better way to integrate things of the tooling into your existing projects. So in this case, I have a web app with some controllers and views and a component, and I would like to just create a preload bundle for this app. I don't have a UI5 YAML file or any other files. I just have package.json with some dependencies to our tooling and to the OpenUI5 core library. So in this create preload.js, I'm using the tooling API in order to create some adapters to locate the resources, for example, from the web app folder, and to have a target, which is the dist folder. And then at the end, I'm running just the component preload task of the builder in order to create this component preload file. And it will then be written into the dist folder. So in order to show this, I'm going to switch to the terminal. So here in the folder, I can now just run this create preload script. And if I have a look into the dist folder, I can now see this component preload file being written in here, and it contains all the files which are part of my project. Here are some examples of how the Node.js API is being used by other projects. So for example, the OpenUI5 project has a custom server and dependency management that enables developers to easily start a server. And we also plan to make this dependency resolution part available within the tooling, and already wrote some concept for that. You can find this RFC in the UI5 Tooling repository on GitHub if you're interested. The Karma UI5 plugin uses the UI5 server middleware to add it to the Express server that Karma starts, instead of, for example, starting a new server in parallel. And this is not public API yet, but we would like to make it available, as we think this can also be beneficial for other use cases where some Node.js-based server is already existing and you would like to add some middleware from our server module. The SAP Theory Tools is a new project by SAP which supports you developing Fiori elements-based applications. And they will show this project in the next talk. And it's based on the UI5 tooling and also uses the UI5 CLI. The OpenUI5 and SAP UI5 build uses the theme build task from the builder. That's what Merlin mentioned earlier, that we replaced this part of our internal Maven-based build with the tooling. So we use the Node.js API here as well. And there are a lot of other projects that integrate our tooling parts like the builder, for example, in a gulp task or in other task runners. So where are we heading to? We have quite some big backlog in the tooling, and we would really like to share this with you and give some insights on what we will be working on in the future and which topics we would like to address. So as already mentioned by Merlin, in the timeline, we would like to further improve the extensibility. We now have tasks and middleware, but we would like to also make other things more extensible so that the community can build on top of that. We also would like to give an option to reduce the build result size. So for example, if you are doing a self-contained build of your app, then you end up in a dist folder which is quite large, and for most use cases you don't need all of the files. So we would like to add some options that you can really tell which features or which scenarios you would like to use or to support, so that we don't need to build everything, and also that the dist folder will not end up being this big, which is mainly important if you deploy this, for example, to a mobile device or in other scenarios where the size of the distribution really matters. We would also like to improve our bundling. So right now we are using a bundler that's actually still from the early days of UI5, which was written in Java and based on Maven, which we developed over the years further and further and improved. And then with the UI5 tooling, we integrated that also into the Node.js world. So we ported our Java-based bundler into the Node.js world and use it right now for bundling. But as you may know, there are a lot of JavaScript bundlers out there, which we would like to also support or integrate with, and eventually replacing our own bundler with more sophisticated bundlers in the future. Performance is always some topic, not only on the client side when you would like to have a good startup performance of your app, but also with bundling or the tooling in general. So we would like to invest here as well to improve or to reduce the time it takes to, for example, run a build, which will also improve CI and CD setups. Scaffolding is something we were asked a lot for the tooling, and right now there are some offerings already based on Yeoman to have some generators. And in the tooling, we would like to have some basic scaffolding support. So not on a level like a Yeoman generator, but to support developers creating some really basic project with all the necessary files, and then to add files as you go, like create views, controllers, other assets you need in your app. So we would like to invest in that way, but not replacing the existing Yeoman templates. And documentation, of course, is something we would like to improve in the future, especially giving more examples on how to use the tooling, and filling some gaps where we maybe did not describe things in a detail where it's really easy for people to understand. And just to improve the documentation so that it's easier to consume the UI5 tooling. So with that, I would like to really thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, just reach out to us also after our session. You can also join the Slack channel, the tooling channel in the OpenUI5 Slack. You can find the link in the UI5 tooling repository on GitHub. Thanks. Have a great evening.
All right. Well, thank you, Matthias and Merlin. I think you guys covered a lot of great ground, and as a result, you have a lot of great questions. So in the last 4 minutes we have here, I'm just going to go over some of the highest rated ones, and we'll see how far we get, all right? So first up, will you ever be able to use template apps with tooling? You know, writing your own templates and such.
So as I mentioned, right now the Yomain templates are a way how you can share, or you can write templates, and you can then just integrate the tooling. So it should be pretty easy to do so. But from the tooling, we won't provide Yeoman-like templates. Yeah. So.
Okay. Then the next question is, what about deploying tasks to ABAP Server, SAP, SCP using UI5 tooling?
Yeah, we get this request a lot. We actually still don't really want to implement any deployment into like the standard part of the UI5 tooling. We rather want to extend our like extensibility concept there so that others can implement their specific deployment solution and just hook it into the tooling so that it's easy to use. But we most probably won't work on a like standard deployment solution there.
Okay, and then will the SAP UI, let's see, okay, that just changed, but let's go with it. Will the SAP UI5 resources for latest LTS version 1.71 be published on NPM?
Yeah, so we started publishing with version 176, and right now we don't plan to also publish 171. So yeah, sorry for that.
Okay. Will the UI5 tooling also be available for Visual Code plugin?
Yeah, I can also take that. Actually, as you saw by Merlin, this YAML highlighting already works. Right now, we don't have plans for some additional plugin for VS Code, but there are also now recently released some other projects that support the writing UI5 apps. So yeah, there's, I guess, more to come, but not necessarily from our side.
Got it. All right, 1 minute left, perhaps one more question. For the UI5 tooling examples, will there be a Git repo shared?
For the examples we just showed, I will just paste it into the chat real quick. But in general, as Matthias said, we want to improve on our documentation and also provide more examples also on the API usage.
Okay, and it's looking like we have time maybe for one more. So let's see, will Web IDE be fully supported by UI5 tooling?
Yeah, that's tricky to answer for us. But as far as I know, it actually already supports version 1.0. But since with version 2.0 of the tooling, we also raised the limit for the minimum version of Node.js. There is currently an issue there because Web IDE currently uses a too old Node.js version. And I'm not sure whether they're going to upgrade that.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. We are at the top of the hour. I think people know where to find you if they have more questions.